If you have a service that you want to run in an Azure App Service, or maybe a container instance or an Azure Container App, and you need that service to connect to a storage account or a key vault, how can you set it up so that that service has the appropriate access? You can use account keys, potentially connection strings, depending on the type of resource. I'm just using storage account and key vault in this example because they're probably the most common types of resources that you want to connect to. And in this show, we're going to talk about user-assigned managed identities, or UAMIs. So why user-assigned managed identities? If you have a look at, say, for example, an app service, you've got your system-assigned managed identities or user-assigned managed identities, or we're calling them UAMIs. So if you get a system-assigned managed identity and you delete the app service, then the system-assigned managed identity is also removed. UAMIs have their own life cycle, so I can delete this app service, and it might also have a system-assigned managed identity as well. I can delete the app service, but the UAMIs remain. And one of the things you can do with the UAMIs as well is you can assign them to multiple services. So if we did have other services that we wanted to get the same permissions, then we can just assign the UAMI to those services. For a storage account, you could use access keys to provide access for the service. I'd call that the old school way of providing access. But if you do that, then you need to work out a regular process that's going to be run to rotate those keys and update them on your pipelines and update them on the services that are running in production. Obviously, if you've got more services, then the more that process would need to be automated and would likely require a restart of the service. So there's restarting of a service that's probably running just fine for no reason can sometimes lead to things going wrong. So if we can avoid doing that, then great. So what we're going to do in this show is I'm going to create a very boilerplate weather forecast API that I'm going to run in an app service. Then we're going to create those Azure resources using bicep. And I'm going to hook up with Copilot to help me accelerate the creation of that. But I'm not going to go into any depth with that resource creation process because the real focus of the show is on the architecture and the use of the UAMIs, the user-assigned managed identities. So we'll also obviously look at the code changes that are necessary in your .NET application to make sure that those UAMIs are used and the connection works. So if that sounds like something that you need to hook up, then stick with us. First thing we need is the .NET API so that we can run that in the app service and verify that we can connect to the storage account and key vault. I'm just going to speed up the recording here because it's just going to be the boilerplate project. We now have our boilerplate weather API. Next, I want to add some code to check that we can connect to the key vault and connect to the storage account. And given it's the AI age, I'm just going to ask Copilot to do this for me. Basically, I want a new API endpoint called /test. And in the code, retrieve a secret from the key vault and test the connectivity to the storage account. And if any error occurs, return that in a problem. Now, I tried this in Visual Studio, and it didn't realize that I was using minimal APIs. It gave me a controller. The code looked kind of okay. And it did remind me that I needed to add some NuGet packages. But it really should know that I'm using minimal APIs. So I'm going to try that now here in VS Code instead. I think it generally does a better job. Let's just give it this as our context. So we just open it up to provide that context. Now we'll see what this suggests. Yeah, so this has modified it and added the test endpoint down here. Now we can just, it's easier to look at it in the editor. So this is apply to the program file. So we'll do that, give that a click. That's going to modify the code over here. Okay, so yes, it's added it as a minimal API, exactly what we wanted. We can see these are the using statements that we need to add some NuGet packages for. I think it's got some .NET add packages here. Now I've already gone to this correct folder. This is where the CS proj is. So we'll just run those and add those packages and see if any of these red squiggly lines go away. That last one's sort of hanging. Whilst it's doing that, I'm just going to accept the changes that the AI is suggesting. So this is adding in the secret client and the blob client, which we'll use later on in the new method being passed in here, the secret client and the blob client. So we'll just accept our new method there as well. Okay, so then we've got that. Don't know why it's hung, so I'll try and figure out what's going on there. All right, the NuGet packages are all added, and our new API endpoint is ready to go. I'm going to leave that pretty much as is and figure out what's wrong with the code after deploying it. One interesting thing to note here is when we're creating the secret client and the blob service client, they're both using this default Azure credential as the token credential. What that is basically going to do is it's going to use any identity that your app service has in order to try to connect to the thing that we're initializing here. So in this case, the KeyVault, and in this case, the storage account. That statement will make a bit more sense when we hook up the an identity to the app service we're going to deploy this code to. So let's create those Azure resources. If you already have those resources created, you can look in the show notes. There's like chapter type links there. You can jump ahead or jump back to areas of interest to you. I'm going to use bicep to create the resources, and I'm going to leverage Copilot to create that bicep and a PowerShell script to run that bicep for me because it's easy, so why not? You can obviously create it in the portal, but I'd strongly recommend, even for really simple things, get familiar with using infrastructure as code. It's not hard, especially with the help of AI these days. So what I'm going to ask Copilot to do is give me a PowerShell script to run a bicep template that creates these resources, which is a resource group, an app service, a storage account, a key vault, and a secret in the key vault. So we'll send that off, see what it comes back with. All right, so that took a few seconds. And so here we have PowerShell script. Don't want to insert it into the terminal. If you go to more actions, I don't want to apply it to my bicep file, so I want to insert it into a new file and save that file as run bicep.ps. Well, it's already a PS1, so run bicep is all we need. Okay, so it's got the important things that are needed. Australia East is where I'm going to create my resources because that's close to me. That's the resource group name that I told Copilot I wanted it to be called. That is the name of my bicep file. Now, if I'm in here, I'm already in the infra folder. I think it's the template file doesn't need that infra step. Change directly there for a moment. So my run bicep's in the same folder, so I'm just going to fix that up. So it's going to create a new resource group, and then it's going to deploy the resources from the bicep template. All right, well, now let's come back to the main bicep, and I think down here is the bicep. So let's add that to main bicep. Right, so I've gone through and resolved a few issues and run it. Run the PowerShell script, which runs the bicep, which has updated, created all the resources in Azure. I'm not going to go into details of all the errors, but things like that parameters wasn't right, and in the bicep, it didn't like this location thing. If you get an error when you try and deploy your bicep, throw the error back at Copilot. It's generally pretty good at helping you resolve whatever the problem is. The other thing is I added in this little name that I like to give the deployment, because otherwise you just end up with main as the deployment name. Looks like this, and then because it's the same name every time, it just overwrites it, and I like to see a history. So this is just giving you a reverse date and time so that I can look at the history, and that's particularly interesting if there were errors during the deployment. You don't lose that history of errors. Okay, so what resources were created? All the ones we asked for. So we've got the app service plan, the app service on a plan, KeyVault, and the storage account. The KeyVault, one thing to double check here is the access configuration needs to be RBAC. It generally isn't by default. I explicitly asked for Copilot to set RBAC authorization to true, and it did that in the bicep. So it's got that here. That's important for when we set up the user assigned managed identity, the UAMI. It's going to, and we assign RBAC roles, it's not going to work. Okay, so this vault access policy uses the access policies. That's sort of the old way of doing it. It still works fine if that's the way you have to do it. Right now, we have this. So we've got our app service, KeyVault, storage account. So the next thing we want to do is create the UMIs, assign the roles, and then add the UMIs as identities onto the service. First thing, before I do that though, I'm going to deploy the API we created earlier, so we can just verify that, yep, we definitely don't have access. I'm just going to do that on speed and keep it in the show, so you can just check if that is of interest to you, but I do want to keep the focus on the UMIs. Okay, that publish succeeded. So if we have a look at our app service now, it should have a working API. There's nothing there, but I think we probably just need to hit /test was our URI, and then we get an error back. Perfect. 500, which is what we've asked for. and it's saying the default Azure credential failed to retrieve a token because we haven't hooked that up yet. So let's go ahead and hook that up so that we don't get a 500 back. So how do we create the UMIs? With Copilot. So I'm going to tell it to create 2 UMIs and I've given them the name that I want. Add both UMIs as identities on the web app and assign required RBAC roles to access the storage account and the KeyVault. And keep in mind, I don't know off the top of my head what the correct roles are. So I'm hoping that there won't be any hallucinations and Copilot will give me the right roles. Okay, that's finished. So let's see what it looks like in the editor. So go to the top of the generated code and apply to the in-context file. And then we can have a look at what's changed. Okay, so on the UMI Access app, user assigned. Okay, I'm just going to keep everything. I'm just going to have a quick scan look. So we've got some RBAC roles. Sure. The UMIs by the looks of it. And that's it. All right. We'll just run it and see what happens. So run the bicep. Okay, it's not happy with it. I'm not going to troubleshoot these changes because again, I want to keep the focus on the usage of UMIs rather than the usage of Copilot. That completed. I did get a few errors that I needed to resolve. I just wanted to show this one because it's a bit ugly when you first look at it. Basically, it says the principal doesn't exist in the directory. Maybe there's a timing issue, but it says to set the role assignment principal type property as a potential solution, and that works. So what Copilot gave me was that, and I simply added principal type of service principal, and then it all worked. So there we go. That generated that. The other things that came up were this kind of issue, and really I just simply clicked fix using Copilot and accepted the answer. So you can do that sort of thing with whatever Copilot generates for you. Copilot. Okay, so that has run, so we can have a look at what this looks like in Azure now. You can see I've got my different deployments, had a couple of deployment failures. Now, let's refresh. And we've now got 2 UMIs. And if we look at the first one, which is the KeyVault, do we have any associated resources? I don't know if this has worked. I assume it did. It was in the bicep. So there we go. We can see that our web app has been assigned this identity, which is one of the interesting things about using the UMI. You can see all of the app services that it has been assigned to. Okay, so this will be the same. It's been assigned to our web app, so our web app should have access. Now the role assignments that it's been given, so if we take a look at the KeyVault, if we look into RBAC, role assignments, and just search for, I think it was access. This is our managed identity, and it's got a KeyVault secrets user. So let's see if we get a different result when we try and run. Okay, can't get test. Yeah, so when I redeployed the bicep, it lost the image and tag information. You can find that in the deployment center of the web app. It would have done that because it's been updated from here. So I just, for now, I've just gone in and manually changed it here, and I will update it in the bicep soon. So after making the change here manually and clicking save, when we go to the website, we're now getting 500 still, but it's a different error. This time, it's unable to load the proper managed identity. So, and the reason why it's saying that is there's two. If we take a look at our WebApp identities, user assigned, there are two UMIs assigned here. So if we look at our code, we're just telling it to use the default credential. But we need to tell it which identity to use because there are multiple. So we'll do that now. All right, so what do we need to do? Let's create two new credentials. One is the KeyVault credential. And it's still a default Azure credential, but there's some options that you can pass in. So if we take a look at that, that's probably a little small. So you can pass in some default Azure credential options. So that's what we're going to do. New Azure credential options. Now there's a lot of options, and so which one do we need? We need the managed identity client ID. Okay, then we'll want the same thing, but we'll do that as the storage account credential. Then up here, let's just move this onto a new line so it's easier to read. So this is the KeyVault. So we'll get the KeyVault cred. And same here. Let's drop that on a new line. And instead of doing that, so if you're going to use the new default Azure credential like this with no options, it's only going to work if there's one identity. So I think I would recommend that you always set this the managed identity client ID in the options in case extra identities are added in the future. You won't then need to change your code. You only need to change it if you need to take advantage of that new identity. Okay, so this is the storage account cred. Where do we get the managed identity ID? We take a look, go back to our web app. These are our identities. So for the storage account, just click on that. You've now in the managed identity, and there is your client ID. Copy to clipboard. So this is the storage account. Then for the KeyVault, user assigned, that's KeyVault UMI, and we'll grab that client ID. So now we're clearly specifying which UMI to use to access which resource. So if we redeploy this, then we should have access. Okay, I've just published that from Visual Studio. Normally I'd like to make a commit, it go to a pipeline, and it get continuously deployed. But we're going with the simple approach here. I'm going to click this pretty print. So now we're not seeing an error. We can see that storage status is connected, which if we take a look here, that's in our OK result. Storage status as connected, and the secret's returning the secret value, which is giving us the whole thing. And we probably don't want the whole thing. We can see that the value is here. What we really need isn't the secret value. We want the secret value. If we redeploy that, then we'll get what we are expecting, which is secret and then top secret, storage status of connected. But the important thing is we can see that we now have access to our storage account and we now have access to our KeyVault. And it's all provided from the UMIs, which we configured in bicep. We don't need to manage any secrets anywhere. Account keys. We don't need to rotate them to make sure that we stay secure. We don't need to add those secrets to the pipelines. It's just so much easier if you take a little bit of extra time and set up these UMIs to provide access to the accounts that you need. So finally, I'd like to suggest a strategy for how you implement your UMIs. I like the idea of having one UMI per Azure resource that you need to provide access to. Then you can follow a naming convention of the name of the resource /UMI. So in this case, my storage account -UMI, my KeyVault -UMI. If you start making your UMIs a bit like a Swiss Army knife and it provides access to multiple and potentially a growing list of things, then you'll probably end up with services that have access to things that they don't need access to. And you want to apply the principle of least privilege. So if you've just got a single UMI that acts as a single resource, that's when you can go and have a look at your web app and you can clearly see that, okay, yes, this has access to the storage account and access to a KeyVault. And we know that that's all it has access to simply by looking in the Azure portal. So that's it. We've seen how we can use UMIs to provide access to different kinds of Azure resources. And we've seen how to create those UMIs and give them the required access, the roles, using bicep and using Copilot to create that bicep. And we've also seen, the code changes that are needed in order to use those UMIs, and that we really should specify exactly which UMI we want to use to access which resource. So I hope that's been really helpful for someone. If it was helpful, help the channel and do the like and subscribe thing. Thanks for watching. Be kind, be curious, and go create something great.